my channel. I have 2 books to review and I cannot figure out which one to do first. But I think what I'm going to start with is the one that I can't remember the name of. Which is always a really good place to start. And that would be Throwback by Lerangis. I hope I said that right. Again, I should have done my homework and figured it out beforehand because I know it's extremely rude not to know authors' names, but you know what? I just don't have that kind of time sometimes. And that is going to be another one of my 9/11 lineup. And it's also another one of my 9/11 lineup that doesn't deserve to be in my 9/11 lineup. I must not be vetting properly. I must be seeing something that says 9/11 and I just go for it without reading the entire synopsis. Because this one, and then People Who Knew Me, I could have sworn on my life that they had to do with 9/11. But now that I'm reading them and reviewing them and going back and reading the synopsis because this is not what I thought it was going to be about, yeah, it's really not about 9/11. To be fair, however, well, I can't really say to be fair. I really have no idea. Like, I know I found this book because I Googled 9/11 novels. Pardon the interruption. You know I've been complaining about my eyeliner. Well, I finally bit the bullet and just bought a completely new kind, and it's so much better. It is 11:05 right now, and I guess that's how long it took for it to start rubbing away, which I will take. Oh my gosh, what time did I wake up this morning? 8 a.m.? I'll take 15 hours over 3 minutes. So there we go. I found this book because I Googled 9/11 fiction. Honest to goodness, guys, like, are they changing the synopses on these book covers? Because I have no recollection whatsoever of it being about anything but this kid trying to save his grandmother on 9/11. The deal is there's this kid named Corey. He's 13 and he has an active imagination. He had an extremely close relationship with his grandfather, but a number of years earlier, his grandfather just up and vanished. We don't know where he went. Supposedly he went to Canada. Nobody has heard from him since, so they believe that he's dead. Corey doesn't believe this, but that is the general assumption. Corey is on his way to school one day when he runs across some items that he believes were left behind after a film shoot, because he lives in New York and they are filming a Western on his street or something. So he picks up, so this is kind of weird, he picks up a blood pack and he's like, oh, let me stick this in my mouth, which I guess being a 13-year-old boy, that's stuff they do. And the other thing is a pocket watch and then a Metro card. He's on his way and this pocket watch starts getting really hot and the weather kind of changes, and the next thing he knows, he's in the Old West. He's not really freaked out because he's like, oh, I must have stumbled upon the movie set. But then he realizes, I don't actually think I'm on the movie set. He does make it back to his own time and place, pretty freaked out. He heads to his friend Layla's house. So they head off to school, and it is Halloween. This part I thought it was extraneous. I didn't really understand the point of it. But they get to school and there's this pop-up Halloween where none of the students were allowed to wear costumes, but the teachers were. They go through their day, after which Corey is going to go to Layla's house. They're going to have pizza, they're going to get dressed, and they're going to go to the Halloween party. So he's at her house and he notices all this junk in her otherwise clean room, and she tells him how her aunt had left her uncle and disappeared. The uncle was so upset that he wanted to get rid of all of her stuff, yet the mother or somebody was like, don't do it, just give it to us. They're going through some artifacts. I keep calling it a jewelry box. It's not a jewelry box, forgive me. There are a couple photos, and Corey's looking at one photo, and he's like, oh, this is really cool. It's basically New York City back 100 years or so. And so then, I think this is kind of strange too, he goes to the bathroom. And he has a picture with him in the bathroom. As he's looking at this picture, it is getting really hot, and he ends up in the 1830s in which this picture was taking place, because he realizes that the picture was taken at the same time as the belt buckle that his grandfather had left him. So I guess this is why he ends up where he ends up, because that had been the time and place on his mind. But before we get any further, the big spoiler is he can travel through time, but he is a special breed of time traveler known as a throwback, which means that he is able to change events in the past and it will affect the future, whereas normal time travelers cannot. However, the caveat to time traveling is it weakens your genetic chain and it somehow over time can transmute you into another species. The way that they time travel is they have to be in contact with some kind of metal, something from the time and place in which they need to go. Hence the belt buckle. So Corey is thinking about it, he gets transported back into time. So he is in the bathroom of Layla's house 100 odd years earlier, and out the window he sees his grandfather and he's like, wait a minute. So he's like, Grandpa, what's up? You know, like, stay there. By the time he gets downstairs, his grandpa's not there. But he discovers a note, which, if there's one thing I really had an issue with, so I thought this book was fine. It wasn't what I had been hoping for, so in that regard, it wasn't the best book I've ever read. But if I had, you know, if I'm looking at it through the lens of just a fun kind of kids, boys adventure story, yeah, it was fine. But my big complaint would be how readily people believed this time travel ability. Note, his grandfather was really good at anagrams, and so he leaves him this note that Corey and the guy that had been in the picture who was building the wall around Central Park figure out. And I was just like, so at this point, this stonemason knows something really strange with Corey. He decides, I'm gonna give him a chance, we'll figure out the puzzle together, and then when he tells me he time travels, I'm just gonna believe him. You know, your grandfather telling you inherited a time traveling gene is one thing, but a stranger from the 1830s is something completely different. They decipher the note, he goes off and he finds his grandfather in Central Park. While he is there, they stumble across this creature. His grandpa is like, we gotta get out of here. It's like they're locked in some kind of battle. Corey jet sets only to encounter a soldier, a Union soldier who's like, I can't go on, I don't want to be in this war, I don't want to fight. Prevents him from killing himself. Grandfather comes back and then they're able to try and time travel back to 2018, at which point he realizes he's the throwback because the guy that he prevented from killing himself went on to do great things, and now the middle school that he attends is named after this fellow. So the middle school that he had been going to when the book started is no longer his middle school, and he remembers how things were, but Layla does not. We have multiple perspectives. During the time that Corey is off doing what he's doing, we are seeing Layla being like, where did he go? Her friends come over and they're like, oh yeah, well we saw Corey sitting on a bench with a homeless man. She goes and she finds him and she realizes it's him with his grandfather. She's like, oh my gosh, hey, what's up? Doesn't second guess anything. And I get it, this is a middle grade novel. But I did expect a little more realism in that sense. Maybe I'm asking too much for a middle grade novel. Then they divulge everything to her, and she's like, I don't know if I believe you, but okay. My mind would have been blown. I'm like, I need a minute. Instead, they're like, yes, let's go to the Halloween party, at which point they encounter, I guess she's the popular girl, and she's hugging and kissing all over Corey. He's like, excuse you, and Layla explains to him that they used to date, and apparently he's ultra cool, whereas before he'd been ultra nerdy. And they go to the party, they have fun, they come home, and Corey talks more with his grandfather. He decides, you know what I want to do? I want to go back to September 11th, 2001 and try to save my grandmother. his grandpa reveals that they had actually been separated. He doesn't remember why. He doesn't remember what their fight was about. He just says they weren't getting along, and this is going to make things harder because the grandfather had already tried going back and talking her out of it and saving her life, and it hadn't worked. I thought, to use the word easy, I know I say that a lot, I didn't think this was necessary. I liked the fact that their fight, that their separation created tension and suspense. But does he really not remember why they were separated? That was hard for me to swallow. I would have liked for that to have just not been there entirely, because everything we get from her, which granted, she's in the present day of 2001, whereas his memories are coming from 17 years later. But I was just like, something like that, not only were you separated for some reason, but then she dies on top of it, that whole situation would have been imprinted on my psyche. I could not have forgotten why we'd separated, especially because he acts like he's so in love with her. At this point, I'm thinking, and this is probably my adult brain overthinking a middle grade novel, but I'm thinking maybe he really wasn't that in love with her. Maybe there was something else going on behind it when really that's not it at all. But it didn't entirely make sense to me why he would be so obsessed with her and with the situation when they had been on the verge of divorce. And when we encounter her, she cannot stand him. And because he keeps visiting her and trying to prevent her from going into the towers, and then I guess on top of all the things that his present 2001 day self had done to get her attention, she cannot stand the guy. So you would think that on some level he would remember those residual feelings and everything that's associated with them. In any case, he gives Corey this envelope of things related to his yaya and instructs him on how to possibly find her. Corey does end up in New York about an hour before the planes hit. His yaya's grandfather had been an extremely important part of her life, and he realizes that there's this church nearby, and that day was like in honor, like because they're Greek, so it's in honor of that name within the Greek church. So he's like, oh, I know exactly where she would have gone that morning before she went to work. So he hightails it to this church, which one of my favorite parts, and this is why I was so upset when the book veered away from 9/11, was we got all these comparisons of present day, as in 2018 New York, and then 2001 New York, how he's like, it's the same, but it's different. So I really enjoyed seeing the comparisons, because it gives you a sense of what was versus what is, in the way that 9/11 changed the world forever. He gets there, and whoever it is that leads Greek services is like, she's not here, I know who you're talking about. And Corey's like, here's my cell phone number, give me a call when she shows up. Why he had to leave this church, I have no idea. I think what he wanted to do was look at other places that she might have been. So he realizes at some point his phone probably doesn't work 17 years before it was invented. So he hightails it back to the church, only for the guy to be like, oh, she just left. So he catches up to her. And it goes along with how readily everybody is willing to believe this time travel thing. He just blurts everything out, which naturally is going to scare a person. So I wish that the author had developed that differently, like created a different kind of argument or rationale behind how Corey was going to get his grandmother to talk to him, to listen to him, to perhaps change the course of the future. It doesn't work. He scares her. He gets hit by a car. She gets to the towers. He tries to catch up with her. Planes hit. Next thing you know, we don't know anything at all. We have that cliffhanger of what happened to Corey. Now we're with Layla, and because she 100% believes in time travel, even though she's never experienced it, heard of it, seen it in her whole entire life, and as far as this society goes, time travel does not exist. she's extremely worried, thinking, all right, well, when he changed things and our school changed, I completely forgot about what was before. So what do I remember or not remember now? Well, I still remember his yaya being gone, but I'm still gonna call his sister, make up a really lame excuse, and maybe I should give her grace because she's 13. These kids don't really act 13, they don't feel 13, but she's like, is your grandma still alive? And the sister's like, oh yeah, da da da. So Layla's getting all excited, and then the sister realizes that's not the grandmother Layla met, and she's like, you know, my grandma's dead. And Layla's like, oh yeah, see you later. And she's like, what? Anyways, they're extremely worried about Corey. We have no idea what's going on with him. And then Layla goes off to play practice. As she exits her building, we encounter the ugliest cat known to man. The cat, and this is, it was a bit unbelievable. So the cat is following them, and they're like, oh my gosh, cat, get away from us. But then Layla's like, oh no, I think the cat's trying to tell me something, because the cat is tapping out like numbers on the pavement. I never would have put two and two together. I never would have been like, this means 3. I wouldn't. So Layla stores this information away until later, at which point we go back to Corey, and he has gone all the way back to 1917 New York, because he had the passport of his great-great-grandfather. I'm thinking, okay, so we're coming a little bit more full circle, so Corey might have gotten thrown further back in time, but he's going to then encounter his great-grandfather, and then somehow this is going to save his yaya. We never meet the grandfather. We barely even think about the grandfather. Corey wakes up, and this was cool too. Outside the context of this is not the direction I thought the book was gonna go, I did like the history of it. So just like the comparison of 2001 New York to 2018 New York, I enjoyed the 1917 New York to the 2018 New York, because we're seeing the metro system being built, and we're seeing the lives of people and kind of how roads were created and what the boroughs looked like 100 years earlier, or not even 100 years. Well, yeah, 100 years, 1917 to 2018. Corey, he wakes up in a partially built railway tunnel. I either skimmed this, or I wasn't paying close enough attention, or I didn't care because it was kind of boring. And there were a lot of times in this book that the writing was really hectic. It was very hard for me to keep up with. But he wakes up, he's surrounded by homeless guys. And then the next thing I know, there is this, I think it's a lawyer, who is like, oh, let me help you out of there. Guys, like, if you ever need me, let me know. They go their separate ways, only for Corey to realize that he's been robbed. He goes back into the tunnel, and he's asking around, and people give him these names. So he goes to the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, oh, let's go check a pawn shop. Again, I must have skimmed. I do not understand what happened. I thought that somehow the pawnbroker gave him money. Maybe he gave money to the thieves who stole his stuff. There was something about money. And then there's something about this lawyer who is trying to enlist Corey into being his apprentice or something. It was kind of confusing for me. I didn't put a lot of effort into clarifying things for myself because I was just ready to get through it. But the next thing we know, Corey has hooked up with this guy named Quinn, who is from the Midwest and is a cowboy and has come to New York because New York apparently had this system, which again, it's the history, it's really interesting, where the trains needed cowboys to clear the tracks for them, get debris out of the way, make sure the homeless or the drunk were in the tracks. And Quinn is like, gung-ho, this is what I'm here for. And we all know something's up with Quinn. There's something not quite honest about Quinn. We don't know what it is. So they team up almost unwillingly, in my opinion. Corey doesn't seem to want to hang out with Quinn. He's more concerned about getting home, finding the people who robbed him, which to me, I didn't understand why he was so willing to just go along with everything people asked him to do or conscripted him into. So they're walking along and they see a fruit stand, and Quinn is like, oh, watch this. So Quinn throws his voice, has like this puppet dog. So throws his voice and is doing a show, all the while is stealing fruit. They get caught, only then to get caught by the police. When the police go to question the fruit stall vendor, Corey's like, well, how come they're able to just eat fruit off the stall and not get in trouble? And somehow he's heard. The policeman is like, blah, 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 I'm big and I'm bad and I'm threatening and I'm going to take you guys to jail. But wait, maybe instead of putting you in jail, I'm just going to, enlist you into our service for a day. A day! I mean, maybe it was supposed to be longer and they somehow got away. Again, things would happen all at once and it didn't always make sense to me. It felt really convoluted. Their job is to muck out the horse stalls, and Corey is like, I've never even ridden a horse. And it is quite funny because Quinn is like, how old are you? Where have you been that you've never even been on a horse? So Quinn is bound and determined to teach Corey how to ride a horse so that Corey can help Quinn on this cowboy job. And Quinn is so positive that he can teach Corey how to ride a horse in a day. Again, super unrealistic. There was very little doubt in Quinn's mind, which I appreciate confidence, but I appreciate realism even more. So I would have preferred Quinn to be like, okay, it's gonna take some time. I can do this, like I can teach you. It's gonna take some time. Instead, he's like, you're gonna be, the second best horse wrangler or whatever in the realm by tomorrow, and we go and apply for that job. And Corey's like, I really don't want to. He does it anyways. That night, they go back to the gash, which is the railway tunnels, and they are tricked by this gang of boys. A fight ensues, at which point Quinn accidentally almost kills one of the gang members. And the police are coming. They're the Uga boys. They all flee except for the one who's dying on the ground. Quinn is noticeably shocked. They go into the gash where all of those homeless are like, we hate the Uga Uga or the Uga Uga boys. We're gonna help you escape. And because of what you've done, fighting back, we're gonna tell you that the names you were given are not the right names. Those people don't exist, but you need to get out of here because things are gonna get worse for you. They head to a Fleabag hotel. At this point, I was thinking that during the fight, Quinn had been injured, and this injury was going to prevent him from pursuing his dream. It doesn't. They are extremely tired the next day because Quinn refuses to go to sleep, refuses to share the bed with Corey. Quinn is just extremely tired, but shows off his skills and gets them both a job, even though Corey cannot ride a horse, much less use a lasso. After they prove themselves, Corey's like, hey, let's go swim in the Hudson, which again is one of those really fun historical things because he's like, you could never swim in the Hudson in current day New York. It just wouldn't be okay. Like, you would die from whatever crap is down there. So he's like, we haven't bathed in a couple of days. We are covered in muck and mud and blood and yuck, so let's go take a dip. And Quinn is like, no. This is another one of those instances where after I saw where it went, I was cool with it. But it could have been developed better. It was really off-putting because they have this great time. Corey suggests they go swimming. Quinn doesn't want to. And then one of the boys who's already swimming is one who throws Quinn in the water. But Quinn is irate with Corey, claiming Corey doesn't respect him and everything's about Corey and he can't take no for an answer. And Corey's like, dude, I had nothing to do with it. So I thought it was an overreaction. But here is a spoiler. Quinn is actually a girl. Her name is Catherine. I don't know exactly what the author is trying to get at here. Because eventually it's alluded that Catherine likes Corey, but from Corey's side of the conversation, because she's surprised that Corey doesn't think she's an abomination for not wanting to do girly things, for wanting to dress as a boy and do boy things, to pretend to be a boy to get a job. And Corey, I feel like, takes it to the point of gender issue. And I don't know if it's supposed to be Catherine is a guy stuck in a girl's body, or if she's just a tomboy. Because as I said, she alludes to the fact that she has a crush on Corey. So my thought is she just doesn't want to do what girls do. So I was a little confused as to what issue we were trying to address here, what social issue we were trying to address. I thought this was interesting. Nothing came of it. But Corey is like, there's nothing wrong with you. The way that you're thinking and wanting to behave and wanting to live your life, like, that is not unusual where I come from. And she, yet again, is one of those people who readily believes that he is from the future, that he can time travel, because in their fight, he was like, you don't think I have secrets? Do you want to know my secret? And she says, take me with you. And I thought that was a really fun concept. And of course, he's like, no, not going to do it because you'd never survive. And I'm like, valid point, but it would have been kind of cool to take the story that way, because you also get the sense that maybe Layla likes him, or he might like Layla. And so I know this is middle grade, but I thought that would have been an interesting twist, either as a new romantic interest or just of out of place, out of time. They do eventually find the guy who robbed Corey. And it goes like this. They're doing their job. Quinn rides off into the sunset because she's chasing a rabbit or something, which again, it's one of those things where Quinn takes her job so seriously. And then she gets super silly and abandons Corey, who is incapable of doing this on his own, to chase a rabbit or whatever it was that she chased because she was all giddy about accomplishing something. Naturally, a drunk stumbles onto the tracks and is out cold, which again was something I thought happened extremely quickly. He was non-responsive when Corey tried to wake him up. And this is all about character development, character growth here, so I'm okay with it. But I thought it lacked proper development. Like, all of this lacked proper development. Corey manages to tie the rope around the guy and uses his horse to pull him off the tracks. In thanks, the guy reveals the name of the person who actually robbed Corey, and it turns out to be the guy that Quinn almost killed. Which I liked the way that it came full circle, but at the same time, it was another one of those things that didn't quite make sense to me, because by all intents and purposes, Quinn had killed him. Yet now he's risen from the dead. It wasn't actually that deep of a cut, but it was enough that everybody around them was like, oh, he's dead. They meet up with the drunk later, and the drunk's like, I can lure him out of this bar, and you guys can do what you need to do with him. So they come up with this plan. Of course, everything goes haywire. But in the midst of the scuffle, Corey is able to find certain items like his phone and then a wallet in which he thinks maybe the guy put some coins in. So he grabs these things. They're trying to get away, only for the guy to get the upper hand. Rat Boy is his name. Rat Boy ends up falling on his own knife and dying. And Corey at this point says, it's time for me to go home, guys. And then when he gets home, he and Layla head to his house, only for everything to be different. His grandfather looks entirely different. There's a different dynamic within his family. And then his Yaya walks in. He's like, how in the world did this happen? Because Layla, here's another thing that I forgot to talk about. Layla is a time traveler as well. So that really ugly cat turns out to be her missing aunt, who had been transspecied because she had been addicted to time travel. I know all of this is going into the other two books in the series, but I think it was Publishers Weekly wrote how there were just some really weak elements, and that was one of them, where they could have done more with it in this book, because I don't plan on reading the others. Yet there's all of these elements that are so underdeveloped because he didn't want to finish them in any sort of capacity in this book. I don't really want to compare it to Harry Potter, but I think Harry Potter is a great comparison in just terms of things are resolved within each book. Of course, there's always a bigger issue that needs further resolving, but you can basically finish a book and all those problems are tied up in a neat bow. And then sometimes you don't realize they're not tied up in a neat bow until you get to a further book and Rowling expounds upon it some more. I wish that was something that the author had done in this book, was make you think that you understood things and that things were okay, only then to give you more information to expand on the problem in the next book. All we know is that that big rat boar creature from the 1800s that the grandfather had been fighting was another one of his grandfather's old friends who had been transspecied. At that point, I was thinking, like, this is an arch enemy of his grandfather's, and his grandfather had been hiding in this time period, which I don't know how the grandfather knew to be there at that specific time in order to meet Corey, but he did. But it just turns out that it was another guy from his group who had turned into whatever that creature was. And then there's another creature in present day New York, which is more like a giant rat. I was like, okay, how did Layla put that one together so quickly? Like, a giant rat is a giant rat. It would scare me no matter what. So why in afterthought did she say, I walked past this really unsettling giant rat and I think it is a transspecied time traveler. These kids are far smarter than I ever was at the age of 13. She is all worried about Corey. She is so upset that she throws the box that she could not open, the one that I keep calling a jewelry box that's not, of her aunt's. And so when she picks it up, she's like, oh my gosh, maybe the numbers that the cat tapped out to me are the answer to this lock. Because that's exactly what I would have been thinking. I mean, I was thinking it because I was the reader, but as a 13-year-old girl, I would be like, that would not have been 1 and 1 equals 2. So she opens up the box, realizes the truth, and that's when she goes outside and she meets her aunt and fun, and her aunt is a giant cat, and her aunt leads her into Central Park so they can have a private conversation, and they have this encounter with a vicious dog and blah, blah, blah. And Layla tries to go to 9/11. She's like, maybe I'm a throwback. Maybe I can help. So she goes to 9/11, does basically the same thing that Corey and the grandfather had done, and that is scare the grandmother half to death with tall tales, because she's the only person in the entire book with any sense to be like, no, time traveling doesn't exist. This is all just a ploy for my husband to get me back. This all goes back to where I was earlier, where they show up at his house and she's like, I didn't think I saved your grandmother because your grandmother had me kicked out of her office. And what had happened was, just like in the beginning of the book where he prevented the one soldier from killing himself, when Rat Boy died, it turns out that Rat Boy was the founder of the company that Yaya worked for in the Twin Towers. Therefore, that guy was never around to found the company, so she was not able to be in the Twin Towers when they fell happily ever after. On a scale from 1 to 10, I'd say this book is about a 6. I read it in a day. That was my plan. I had a day off and I said, I'm just gonna read this book. So I started it a little bit the night before, and then that next morning I was like, okay, I just have to read this book, only to be interrupted by something that I forgot I had to do. So that took a couple hours out of my day. But I found when I got that phone call reminding me of an errand I needed to run, I was sad to be pulled out of the story. So there were a lot of good elements of this book. I do think it's a fun adventure book for a 12-year-old boy, possibly even a girl. But like I said, there were a lot of underdeveloped elements, and there were a lot of hectic moments where I had a hard time keeping up with the direction of the story. like in the fight scenes. I couldn't picture what was happening because the movements didn't make sense to me. It felt like they couldn't possibly be achieving what they were achieving. A lot was trying to be done, but there wasn't enough time to do it. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you soon. Bye.